Hi, how you going? It's Kate French here. I'm a clinical psychologist, coach, and mentor, and I've put together this really brief presentation for parents who are perhaps wondering what are the steps to take if they've got an anxious child or teenager. And so I thought I would put together a few steps, so just 3 steps that you might be able to take when you're wanting to move from that overwhelm and into taking action. So, yeah, hang about with me, and I'm going to take you through these slides and a few of my ideas. So, what I firstly wanted to do is just acknowledge the load that parents have been carrying currently, but also for the last 18 months in particular. Due to lots of impact of COVID-19 and the impact of the worldwide pandemic, there have been 18 months or more of additional stresses that you might normally have impacting you and your family. There's been constant states of change and uncertainty for families and kids and teenagers. There's been a loss of the usual celebrations and traditional kind of family breaks or family connection times, even that would normally happen, a change and a loss of rituals and routines. A loss of confidence and safety about being around others, particularly in larger groups and communities, and the real legitimate worry about physical safety in terms of from the viruses and things like that, but also just the emotional safety, just feeling on high alert. So just those ongoing changes. The additional stresses of working from home for families that have had to do that, as well as families and communities that have lost jobs as well, and parenting during lockdowns and during homeschooling during the lockdowns has been a huge additional load, which has probably impacted everyone's ability to react to usual stresses, but also knowing how to get back to that equilibrium and just what life was like before this pandemic and just the fact that we've grown up with it the last 18 months. So I just wanted to pay attention to that and acknowledge that it's been particularly challenging and particularly stressful for all of these reasons, but also additional and personal differences that have happened as well. So, I wanted to share with you just 3 steps that you can take starting today to move yourself out of overwhelm if you have a young person that you are caring for and you care about that is experiencing anxiety. So, firstly, we're going to talk about believing in the power of your parenting. The second step is understanding the why of anxious behavior and why that occurs. And the third step is just by starting to make some small changes to create your ideal future. And I'll give you a few examples of what those changes might be. So, the first step is believing in the power of your parenting. So, parents, we know the research is really clear on this. They're the number one biggest influence on their children and their development. Lots of different areas of development, lots of different kind of research about what that might look like. But we know that it's a massive, massive impact. So, that's a really positive thing. However, when our kids are struggling, parents can take that really personally, and we can blame ourselves, and we can be like, what have I done or what have I not done to cause this, or how has this happened? And that's not helpful at all, and it's also not the why. It's not why our kids aren't doing well, or it's not why they're struggling or feeling anxious, but it is how we turn things around. We actually have the power to help them immensely. And so that's actually really liberating to come back to that truth that we can actually make incredibly positive change when we embrace the power of our parenting and the influence that we actually do have. So, putting our parenting power into focus for our kids' emotional development, there's a few things that we know can really shift the needle in a really cool direction. So, one of the things though is paying attention to how we were parented and reflecting on how that might shape our parenting style, even if just to have an awareness that we even have a parenting style. What even is that? But once we become aware of it and aware of our tendencies and aware of where that came from, it's really important, and it helps us to be more reflective and responsive as parents. The other thing, when we do that, it helps us to look at our beliefs about emotions and about the value of emotions in our day-to-day life, especially if we're thinking about how can we improve or how can we support the emotional development of our kids. So when we reflect, we start to ask questions about, what do we think about feelings? What is our own experience about that been, and how does that come out in how we interact with our kids? So the other question that's really important is, how do you think emotionally resilient and intelligent kids occur? Like, what makes them so? And again, we've got decades and decades of research by brilliant researchers, particularly John Gottman and his research institute, the Gottman Research Institute, looks into this question and has been for quite some time, and has come up with some really helpful ideas for parents who are wanting to improve the emotional intelligence and resilience of their kids, about what we can do as parents to try to have that be a reality for our kids. So one of the things that he come up with is a term for a style of parenting called emotion coaching. So we know that when there are naturally occurring parents who use an emotion coaching style, but we can also develop that as a skill. And when we do that, we kind of hone in on these types of actions with our parenting. We're a bit more intentional when we decide to put on an emotion coaching style. So one of the big foundations of it is that we communicate to our kids that all emotions are okay. So this means, we have to, have a bit of a reflection about that question again. What do we think about emotions? What were we taught about emotions from our own parenting, being parented experiences? And then how does that come through? Has that changed since we were kids ourselves? And then how do we respond when our kids have a variety of different emotions expressed to us, whether they're anxious ones or sad ones or angry ones or irritable ones? How do we respond to those? So the foundations of being an emotion coach type of parent is that we communicate that all emotions are okay. However, boundaries around behaviour are okay too. So it's not a free-for-all on any behaviour is acceptable, and that we don't have to have rules or kind of things like that in our households, but certainly continuing to say that all emotions are okay. And then our next step, once we're able to communicate that, is to notice and validate our kids' or teens' emotions, and then actively support them to articulate those feelings. That doesn't necessarily mean just verbally. There are other non-verbal ways and visual ways that we can encourage kids and teens to communicate their emotions, but certainly how we can support that is an important part of validating and supporting them in their feelings. Then the final step of like emotion coaching interaction would be to help them problem solve if we need to. There can be a tendency, I know it's my tendency, and I've met lots of parents, it's the same, that we can jump to problem solving. We want to help. I'm a helper at heart, and we want to help. We've got lots of life experience, and sometimes we can jump into the problem solving stage of supporting our kids and teens before we've done the reflection, before we've done the listening, before we've done the validation about what they're experiencing. So that final is problem solve and help them problem solve and use their logic if they need that. Sometimes they don't need that, and sometimes they move in and out of needing that support. So that's a little bit about stepping into our power and that power to develop our emotion coaching skills, because we know it relates really nicely to developing emotionally intelligent kids and resilient kids as well. So, step two of my 3 steps of moving away from overwhelm is understanding a bit more about the why of anxious behavior. So, what I mean is that seeing anxiety and seeing the behavior that might come with a young person that's appearing anxious as them trying to maintain a sense of safety in their body and in their environment. It's understanding how threats are perceived by your child or teenager, and then how the body then influences what kind of behavior that we're going to observe. So there's kind of like this internal experience that's happening, which we need to understand, and it's very individual, and then how that translates into behavior, and then us kind of making sense of that and helping them make sense of it as well, because it can be very overwhelming for young people experiencing anxiety. Again, it's lots of physiological arousal going on there to varying degrees. So knowing that anxiety is often a response to threats, and threats might be very difficult for us to perceive as threats. We might not be aware of the threats. And the other thing is, the young person might not be aware either, but their body may be sensing it. So we know that when we're not experiencing threat, we're really in a lovely state to engage socially, and we're calm, and we're interacting, and we're well regulated in terms of our facial expression, language if we've got language, and just that back and forth of communication is usually much easier. But when we move down our safety ladder, as it's sometimes talked about in polyvagal theory by Stephen Porges, we might move into a fight and flight response. So lots of people might be familiar with that, which is when our system is getting activated and we go into wanting to get away from the situation, or some people might go into a fight kind of response, and you see more anger and aggression. But usually that's quite obvious and visible. Some kids are even able to describe what's happening internally, whether it's butterflies, whether it's panic sensations, whatever it might be. So usually the threat by then might be able to be described, but not always. It just depends. The other step on our anxiety as a response to threat is that shutdown, immobilized, and perhaps disassociation and a numbness you might see with kids or teenagers. So there is still responding to a threat, but they're not going through the fight and flight, or they may have moved through that, and now there's a lack of activity. It's a real shutdown, and some people get that by chronic exposure to threats to the system, and other kinds of things. So there's 3 sort of responses that I suppose need to be understood as parents who are supporting kids and teens, but also for young people as well, because different activities help us move out of those states more helpfully. So understanding that. The third step is just by starting to make some kind of small change to create your tomorrow. So whatever it might be, just taking action on that, and taking action consistently. So it's not about putting every single thing that you might have ever learnt about anxiety in place, because that just gets you more overwhelmed. It's about really resonating with one small thing that you think can make a difference, and trying that consistently. So I'll give you a few examples of what that might be, but just be thinking you don't have to do it all. I just want to give you some examples. So again, sometimes we talk about understanding tools in terms of that anxiety we were talking about before on our perceiving threats. finding out ways when our arousal level is lower, how we can practice those things to get our calmness even more pervasive. So, this might be thinking about relaxation activities, it might be focusing on pleasurable and fun activities, it might be looking at gratitude activities as a thinking kind of style, and mindfulness activities where we're connecting moments in our body and moments in our mind to one another to help reinforce those neural pathways, and bring some control to that calm feeling. And so that can be a really great tool for when our arousal is elevated, but when we're not heading into perhaps the fight or flight necessarily, and we're not heading into that shutdown. But certainly knowing that there's some tools for calming when we're at the lower level of arousal, and how also we can support our kids and teens in putting some of those into action. The other kinds of tools that you might be thinking about is tools for reducing those anxiety explosions. So, when our energy and arousal is really, really high, thinking about are there ways that we can safely express that. Sometimes it's just about trying to maintain safety. Other times it's about what can you do with that energy. Is it running? Is it dancing? Is it throwing, jumping, swinging? Is it yelling? Is it singing? So expressing some of that. Is it alone time that's going to help reduce that explosion, or can they do that on their own but safely? Is it being outside in nature, and is it finding some sort of safety? So high energy release activities can also be another tool that can be useful to be thinking about as a consistent kind of activity if explosions and high levels of energy are kind of common. And then the other one is longer term tools, probably to prevent those big anxiety shutdowns, where we look overall at exploring strengths and exploring understanding ourselves better, exploring the sensory sensitivities that occur with lots of individuals who also experience anxiety, understanding triggers, and also what depletes our energy over time. So, just trying to manage day to day stresses over time can become very draining on an individual. So, thinking about how we can prevent that complete dead battery kind of feeling, which can end up in that shutdown. Also, as parents in particular, and teachers and educators preparing for change and for moments of unpredictability, we know that one of the hardest things is managing change and managing uncertainty. And that's why I suppose with the pandemic, that's been so challenging in so many ways. Answers haven't been clear, and clear timelines and deadlines and things like that have not been able to be given to anybody, let alone kids and teenagers. And then also finding ways to develop safety skills within the body through interoception skill development. So, interoception is that ability to be aware of internal body signals and awareness of that. So, we know that some young people and some kids and adults are more in tune with stresses that the body might be communicating than others. And so, getting some awareness of that can be helpful to detect those threats a little sooner, but also through mindfulness, helping turn those threats into feelings of safety. So they're just a couple, those three kind of categories in terms of what could be some of the tools that you might put into place, or even one tool, and try to do it consistently as your just your small action about moving towards supporting your young person. So we also know a really essential tool that all parents need, but particularly essential for the parents of kids that have maybe chronic anxiety, demand avoidance, and which is also incredibly common in neurodivergent kids and teens. So, neurodivergent just means kids and teens and adults that have perhaps a neurology that is not typical. So, it might be autistic, ADHD, dyslexic, a speech and language disorder. It can encompass all of those things, but certainly extra support is needed for parents when they're in this role, because there are some additional differences that make it more challenging. So it makes sense that you invite more support around you. We know that understanding different neurology can take a nuanced approach. You need to have a bit more information about it. There's lots of differences in the sensory system and integration of the sensory system for neurodivergent kids and teens. So parents need to understand that. We know that these kids often have prolonged stress and possibly trauma, not from anything that you might have inadvertently exposed them to or done or anything like that, just ordinary living. When you have neurology that's different from most of the population, things are set up for kids with typical neurology, and that is not always going to work well with kids with super sensitive sensory systems and things like that. So it's not going to be a good match, and so that's what can cause that sort of trauma. You're required to be especially attuned and informed, I think, and that is so that you can do the best for your kids. We know these kids and teens require more support from those around them. We know that we want parents, teachers, schools, workplaces, society in the broader sense to be more understanding and more accepting and more accommodating for these differences, so that they don't have to do all of the work all of the time. Bit of understanding goes an awfully long way. But that means you guys advocating as parents for them on their behalf. So that's another additional burden that you guys have got to carry, which is no easy thing at all. So how can I support you? So that's the question that I keep coming back to in terms of my role as a psychologist working in this space. And so knowing that my caseload was full, my waitlist was long, in 2020 I put together a program. And so I was like, right, I'm going to put down all the things, all the ideas, all the steps that I would take when I'm first thinking about how can I support this family, how can I support this young person, what kind of skills are going to be useful in their toolkit to have, where are the gaps. So the 7-day blueprint to understanding and parenting your anxious child was created. So I've had that as a self-paced program for a little while, but I know that the support component of that is really, really important. And I know from running my other programs how valuable it is to be alongside other parents that really get it, that are walking the same journey or very similar journey, and have got beautiful ideas to share with one another. So I decided I was going to do an in-person presentation of it. I'm going to go alongside you, meet with you every day to help unpack the videos, unpack the modules, and help you take the concepts and really apply them to your family and to your child. So even if that's just one or two of those strategies that we cover, then you get some support in actually putting it into place and starting to put that into place with some consistency. So I also know that since I've written this program in early 2020 or late 2019, early 2020, my own knowledge and understanding has grown as well. So I'm really excited to expand on that when I'm talking with you and share my updated knowledge as well as we go. So I just thought I would share with you a little bit about my 3 steps for moving you in the direction so that you can have the future that you want. So yeah, take some action if this resonates with you. I would love to have you in part of the program. And thanks for listening if you've been with me all the way through. I look forward to talking with you very soon. Take care.